The first thing I saw when I pulled off the highway after 14 months overseas wasn't my house. It was a black steel gate. Tall. Freshly installed. Stretching across the entrance of my gravel driveway like it had always been there. Except it hadn't. Behind it, about 200 yards down the road, sat the ranch house I bought before deployment. Same oak tree in the yard. Same weathered porch. But the driveway leading to it was now blocked. Bolted to the center of the gate was a large HOA sign. Private community access. Authorized residents only. Underneath it, another notice flapped in the wind. Bright orange paper. I stepped closer and read it twice. Outstanding HOA balance, $18,640. Violation, unauthorized use of community road. Additional fines accrue daily. 14 months overseas, and apparently I'd been fined for using my own driveway. A white SUV rolled up behind me. The driver stepped out in a bright blazer and sunglasses like she was arriving to inspect construction. Cynthia Caldwell, HOA president. She glanced at my uniform bag in the truck bed, then back at me. Then she smiled. Not friendly. Satisfied. Welcome home, she said casually. You'll need to settle your balance before that gate opens. I looked past her at the metal chain across the driveway. Then I looked at the survey marker half buried near the fence line. Something about the situation didn't fit. Because in the Army, when supply routes get blocked, you learn something fast. The person controlling the road controls everything. But that only works if they actually own the road. And standing there in the quiet morning light, I had one question. How exactly had an HOA managed to lock the gate to my own property? If you enjoy stories where patience, strategy, and the law beat abuse of power, make sure you're subscribed. And as this situation unfolds, think about this. What would you do if you came home from deployment and found someone had locked the road to your own house? I bought the ranch 3 years before that gate showed up. 7 acres just outside the edge of town. Nothing fancy, a small single-story house, a gravel driveway, and enough open land that you could actually hear the wind move through the trees at night. After years of living on or near base, quiet mattered. I was a logistics staff sergeant in the Army. Most of my career had been spent solving problems that involved supply routes, movement schedules, and systems that only worked when every piece stayed in the right place. The ranch was the opposite of that world. Simple. Predictable. And most importantly, it was mine. The land sat beside a newer housing development called Cedar Ridge. Rows of modern houses, identical mailboxes, perfect lawns. And an HOA. When I bought my property, the realtor had been very clear about one thing. The Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association did not include my parcel. Their boundary ended about 30 yards before my driveway began, which meant their rules didn't apply to my land. For the first couple of years, nobody cared. The subdivision stayed on its side of the trees. I stayed on mine. Then about a year before my deployment, the neighborhood elected a new HOA president. Cynthia Caldwell. She had the kind of energy you usually see in people who enjoy running meetings more than living in the community they're managing. Organized. Confident. Always talking about long-term property value. A few months after she took over, I started receiving letters. Polite at first. Invitations to join the Cedar Ridge Community Covenant. Suggestions that shared road access meant shared responsibility. I declined. Respectfully. In writing. That seemed to irritate her. The last letter I received before deployment was shorter than the others. Just one sentence near the bottom that stood out. The association will eventually address the access situation. At the time, I didn't think much about it. Then my deployment orders came through. 14 months overseas. When I left, my gravel driveway connected directly to Old Cedar Road, the same way it always had. No gate. No signs. No HOA authority. But standing there that morning, staring at a steel barrier across my entrance and nearly $19,000 in fines. I realized something important had happened while I was gone. Because HOA presidents don't usually block someone's driveway unless they think they have the paperwork to back it up. And Cynthia Caldwell sounded very sure when she told me, "Your road belongs to the community now." Which raised a much bigger question. What exactly had the HOA filed while I was deployed? I didn't argue with Cynthia Caldwell that morning. That surprised her. Most people probably would have raised their voice the moment they saw a steel gate across their own driveway. But arguing in the street rarely solves anything. It just gives the other side a show. Instead, I read the notice again. Outstanding HOA balance, $18,640. Violation, unauthorized use of community road. Caldwell stood beside her SUV watching me like she was waiting for a reaction. "You received the notices," she said. "We sent several." "I was deployed," I replied. She shrugged. "The association can't pause infrastructure improvements just because someone leaves town." Infrastructure improvements. That was an interesting way to describe locking someone out of their own property. I walked along the fence line slowly. The gate was new, heavy black steel posts sunk deep into fresh concrete. A thick chain ran through the center lock. But something else caught my attention. Near the edge of the gravel entrance, half buried in the dirt, was an old survey marker. A small metal cap hammered into the ground years ago when the property had been mapped. I took out my phone and photographed it. Then the gate. Then the HOA sign. Then the orange violation notice. Behind me, Caldwell folded her arms. "You're not the first homeowner who thought they didn't have to follow the community rules," she said. I looked back at her. "This driveway was here before your subdivision," I said calmly. "That may be," she replied, "but Cedar Ridge controls the entrance now." Controls the entrance. That phrase mattered. Because whoever controls access to land controls everything that happens beyond it. Deliveries. Utilities. Emergency services. Even legal ownership can become complicated when someone claims authority over the only road in or out. I turned back toward the gate and read the notice one more time. Nearly $19,000 in fines. All issued while I was overseas. And according to the paperwork, the HOA had already begun preparing something called lien enforcement procedures. Which meant the situation wasn't just about a gate anymore. It was about paperwork filed somewhere in the county system. Paperwork that supposedly gave the HOA the power to block my driveway. I slid the phone back into my pocket. Because if Cynthia Caldwell believed the association owned that road, then somewhere, someone must have changed the official record. The first thing I did after leaving the gate that morning wasn't call a lawyer. It was open a notebook. Years in Army logistics had taught me something simple about complicated problems. You start by building a timeline. Date of deployment. Date of HOA letters. Date the gate appeared. Date fines began. Every system leaves a paper trail if you look long enough. The HOA certainly had one. By the time I finished sorting through the stack of envelopes in my mailbox, the numbers told their own story. The first letter had arrived 4 months after I deployed. It claimed the Cedar Ridge HOA had assumed responsibility for the entrance road serving surrounding parcels. The second letter included a monthly access assessment. $280. Then penalties began. Late fees. Compliance charges. Administrative processing costs. By the time the last notice arrived, the total had reached $18,640. And at the bottom of that letter was something new. Failure to resolve outstanding balance may result in lien enforcement. That meant the HOA wasn't just sending threatening letters. They were preparing to file a claim against my property. I drove into town that afternoon and walked into the county records office. A quiet room full of filing cabinets, computer terminals, and people who dealt with paperwork for a living. I requested 3 things. The subdivision plat map for Cedar Ridge. the county road easement record for Old Cedar Road, and the parcel boundary survey for my property. The clerk pulled the files and slid them across the counter. Nothing unusual at first glance. My parcel still existed exactly where it always had. But when I traced the entrance road with my finger, something caught my attention. The road connecting my driveway to the county highway had a strange notation beside it. Shared access corridor. That wasn't an HOA designation. That was something else. I thanked the clerk, copied the records, and went home. Meanwhile, the HOA kept escalating. 2 days later, another letter arrived. This one came from a law office representing the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. The tone was colder, more official. The total had increased again. $22,470. The letter explained that continued unauthorized use of community infrastructure would trigger immediate legal enforcement. At the bottom was a short paragraph that stood out. Failure to comply may result in a lien placed against the Mercer property, which meant Caldwell and the HOA board believed they had enough authority to threaten my ownership itself. Most people would panic at that point. Instead, I went back through the maps again, because something about that road classification still bothered me. Caldwell kept calling it a community road, but the county records used a different phrase entirely. Shared access corridor. And in property law, the exact wording of a road classification can change everything. Which raised a much bigger question. If the HOA truly controlled that entrance, why did the county records describe it as something else entirely? 3 days later, I received another envelope from the Cedar Ridge HOA. This one wasn't just a letter. It was an official notice of board review. The meeting would take place the following Thursday evening at the subdivision clubhouse. According to the document, the purpose of the meeting was simple. Final determination of enforcement action regarding unauthorized access to community infrastructure. In other words, they were preparing to make an example out of me. I showed up anyway. The clubhouse parking lot was already full when I arrived. Residents stood in small groups outside the building, talking quietly. Some of them glanced toward me as I walked past. Word had clearly spread. Inside, the meeting room looked more like a small town hearing than a neighborhood gathering. Rows of folding chairs. A long table at the front where the HOA board sat. And at the center of it all was Cynthia Caldwell. She looked completely comfortable. When the meeting started, she opened a laptop and projected a series of slides onto the wall. The first slide showed a picture of the steel gate across my driveway. The second showed a list of violation notices. The third showed the total amount of fines. $31,870. A low murmur moved through the room. Caldwell folded her hands and addressed the crowd. Cedar Ridge invested over $80,000 improving the entrance road and installing a security gate, she explained. Every resident contributes to maintaining that infrastructure. She paused for effect. Except one. Her eyes moved directly to me. The Mercer property continues to use the community road without contributing to the association. A few residents nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. Caldwell clicked to the next slide. It showed a map of the neighborhood with a bright red line drawn across the entrance road. Until the outstanding balance is paid, she said calmly, access will remain restricted. Then she looked straight at me. You're welcome to resolve the matter tonight. The room grew quiet. Everyone waiting to see if I would argue, or shout, or threaten. Instead, I stood up slowly. Could I see the road ownership filing? I asked. Caldwell didn't hesitate. Our legal counsel has reviewed the matter, she replied. The association has full authority over the entrance. That answer drew a few approving murmurs from the board members sitting beside her. Caldwell leaned back in her chair. We'll proceed with lien enforcement if necessary. The board held a short vote right there in front of the residents. 5 hands went up. The motion passed. From the outside, it looked decisive. The HOA had the gate. They had the board vote. And now they had a legal team preparing a lien against my property. By the time the meeting ended, the total they claimed I owed had climbed past $31,000. Caldwell closed her laptop and smiled at the room. "Community rules apply to everyone," she said. People began gathering their things. From the perspective of most residents in that room, the outcome seemed obvious. The HOA had the paperwork. The board had spoken. And the soldier who thought he didn't have to follow the rules was about to learn otherwise. But there was one problem Caldwell didn't know about yet. Earlier that afternoon, before the meeting began, the county records clerk had called me back. Because after reviewing the road documents more carefully, she had found something that didn't quite add up. And if the wording in that record meant what I thought it meant, the HOA might have just built their gate in the wrong place entirely. That night the house felt quieter than usual. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a long day when your mind refuses to shut down. The meeting at the clubhouse kept replaying in my head. Caldwell standing at the front of the room. The slide showing my driveway like it was a violation instead of a piece of land I'd owned for years. And the number she left on the screen before the vote. $31,870. For a moment, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the stack of letters spread across the wood surface. Most people would have called a lawyer immediately. Some might have paid the fines just to make the problem disappear. The Army had taught me something different. You don't rush into a fight until you understand the system you're standing inside. Every structure has rules. Every rule connects to something bigger. Supply chains. Command structures. Legal authority. If one part of the system doesn't match the others, eventually the whole thing breaks. I picked up the county road map again. The same phrase that caught my attention earlier was still there. Shared access corridor. Not private road. Not HOA infrastructure. Shared. That word mattered. Because if the road truly belonged to the homeowners association, the county records wouldn't describe it that way. Still, the situation wasn't simple. Caldwell clearly believed she had the authority. She had a board vote. An attorney. A lien thread already drafted. And a community convinced I was refusing to follow the rules. The easiest option would have been to give in. Pay the fines. Let the HOA keep their gate. Move on with life. But the longer I looked at the map, the more something bothered me. In logistics, when two systems claim control over the same route, there's always a conflict somewhere upstream. And if the HOA really believed they owned that entrance road, then someone, somewhere, must have filed paperwork giving them that power. Which meant the real answer probably wasn't sitting in my house. It was sitting in an office somewhere in the county building. And until I saw that document for myself, I wasn't ready to assume the HOA had actually won anything at all. 2 days after the HOA meeting, another envelope arrived. This one was thicker. Inside was a formal letter from the same law office that had been representing the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. The tone had changed again. No longer warnings. Now it was action. The letter stated that because the outstanding balance had not been paid, the association had begun lien preparation procedures against my property. The total amount listed on the document had increased once more. $34,920. Violation fees. Administrative penalties. Legal costs. All added together like a running meter. According to the letter, if the balance remained unpaid, the HOA would proceed with filing the lien through the county within 30 days. After that, the situation could escalate further. Collection enforcement. Court involvement. Even potential auction proceedings if the debt remained unresolved long enough. I sat at the same kitchen table where I'd been reviewing maps the night before. The letter lay open in front of me. From the outside, it looked like Caldwell's strategy had worked perfectly. The HOA had installed the gate. They had convinced the community that I was violating their rules. Now they had an attorney moving toward legal enforcement. Even the neighbors seemed to believe the outcome was inevitable. Later that afternoon, as I walked out to check the mailbox again, one of the residents from Cedar Ridge slowed his truck beside the road. He leaned out the window. "You might want to just settle it," he said quietly. "They've got lawyers now." I thanked him and kept walking. Because on paper, he was right. The HOA had momentum. They had votes, letters, and legal filings already moving through the system. From the outside, the situation looked finished. Like a homeowner refusing to follow HOA rules was about to lose a very expensive fight. But the county clerk's phone call from the day before was still sitting in the back of my mind. Because while the HOA was preparing their lien paperwork, she had been looking at the same road records from a completely different angle. And according to her, something about the entrance road Caldwell claimed to control didn't actually belong to the HOA at all. The county clerk called me the following morning. Her voice sounded careful, like someone double-checking their words before saying them. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I reviewed the road file you requested." I stepped outside onto the porch with my notebook. "And?" I asked. There was a pause on the line. "Well, the classification the HOA is using doesn't quite match the original filing." That was the phrase she used. Doesn't quite match. She explained that when Cedar Ridge subdivision was approved years earlier, the developers had filed a transportation plan with the county. Part of that plan involved the entrance road that connected the neighborhood to Old Cedar Road. According to the HOA, that entrance road was now private community infrastructure. But the document the clerk found used a different term entirely. Shared access easement. That meant the road served more than just the subdivision. It existed as a legal access corridor for multiple parcels, including mine. Which raised a problem for the HOA. Because easements come with strict rules. You can maintain them. You can improve them. But obstructing them is a different matter entirely. Was the gate permitted through the county? I asked. The clerk hesitated. That's the part one couldn't find. No permit. No construction filing. No obstruction approval. Nothing in the infrastructure database that authorized a permanent gate across the corridor. She emailed me a copy of the original road document a few minutes later. I printed it out and studied the language line by line. The easement description was clear. The access route could not be blocked or restricted without county authorization. Which meant one thing. If the HOA really installed that gate without a permit, then Caldwell hadn't just built a barrier across my driveway. She might have blocked a legally protected access corridor. And that kind of mistake doesn't stay quiet once the county notices it. I didn't drive back to the gate right away after the clerk sent the document. First I sat at the kitchen table and read it. Twice. Then a third time. Because in the Army, when you think you've found the answer to a problem, the first thing you do is check whether you're seeing what you want to see, or what's actually there. The document was an infrastructure filing from the county planning office. It dated back nearly 15 years, long before the Cedar Ridge subdivision had finished construction. At the top of the page was a phrase that explained everything. Recorded access easement, parcel corridor 7B. The map attached to the document showed the exact strip of road where the HOA had installed their gate. A narrow corridor of land running between the subdivision and my property, connecting both to Old Cedar Road. According to the county filing, that corridor existed for one reason: to guarantee legal access to every parcel connected to it. The document spelled out the rules clearly. Maintenance could be shared. Improvements could be proposed. But one condition appeared in bold print near the bottom of the page. No structure or barrier may obstruct access along the corridor without county authorization. I leaned back in the chair. Because that sentence alone changed the entire situation. Cynthia Caldwell had been telling residents that the HOA controlled the entrance road. She had installed a gate. Issued fines. Threatened a lien. But if the road was truly an access easement, the HOA couldn't legally block it at all. And if the county hadn't approved the gate, Then the structure sitting across my driveway wasn't just annoying. It was an unauthorized obstruction on a protected corridor. Still, documents don't mean much until someone with authority enforces them. So the next call I made wasn't to the HOA. It was to the county infrastructure office. A man named David Rourke, the county's transportation compliance inspector, answered the phone. I explained the situation briefly. Gate installed across access road. HOA claiming ownership. Possible easement violation. He asked for the parcel numbers and the road designation. Then he asked a question that told me he understood the situation immediately. Did the association pull a construction permit for that gate? I haven't found one, I said. Neither have we, he replied. Rourke told me he would review the original subdivision approval files. An hour later he called back. This time his tone had changed. More serious. Mr. Mercer, he said, according to the county records, the Cedar Ridge HOA does not own that road. That wasn't surprising anymore. But what he said next mattered even more. It's a shared access easement maintained under county jurisdiction. Any barrier across that corridor requires formal authorization. I already knew the next question before I asked it. Was any authorization granted? No. Silence filled the line for a second. Then Rourke sighed. That means the gate shouldn't be there. He explained the problem in simple terms. When developers build subdivisions, they often dedicate access roads to shared corridors so multiple parcels can legally reach public highways. Those corridors remain protected because blocking them could isolate properties or prevent emergency access. Installing a gate across one without approval creates several legal violations at once. Access obstruction, infrastructure interference, potential safety hazards. And once a complaint reaches the county office, inspectors are required to review the site, which meant someone would soon be standing in front of the same gate that had been blocking my driveway. But unlike the HOA board meeting, that inspection wouldn't be controlled by Cynthia Caldwell. Here's what we're going to do, Rourke said. We'll schedule a compliance review. He explained the process. First, the county would confirm the road classification. Then they would examine whether the HOA had authorization for the gate installation. If no permit existed, the county could issue an obstruction notice requiring removal. And depending on the circumstances, additional penalties could apply. I thanked him and ended the call. For the first time since returning from deployment, I walked down the driveway and looked at the steel gate again. From the outside it still looked powerful. Heavy metal posts. Locked chain. HOA sign warning residents to stay out. But once you understood the system behind it, the structure looked different. Because the gate wasn't protecting HOA authority. It was sitting directly on top of a county-controlled access corridor. Which meant the association hadn't just blocked my driveway. They had installed a barrier on infrastructure they didn't legally control. The next day the county posted an inspection notice. Cynthia Caldwell responded immediately. She emailed the community explaining that the HOA's attorney would address the matter. But by then something had already shifted. The situation wasn't about unpaid HOA fines anymore. It wasn't even about the gate. It was about whether the Cedar Ridge Board had taken control of land they didn't actually own. And when county inspectors start asking that question, the answers tend to become public very quickly. Which meant the next meeting between the HOA and the county wouldn't happen inside a private clubhouse. It would happen in a room where official records, permits, and legal authority were examined in front of witnesses. And once that process started, Cynthia Caldwell would have to explain one very simple thing. Why her association installed a locked gate across a road the county still controlled. The county inspection happened 3 days later. Not at the HOA clubhouse. Not behind closed doors. Right there at the entrance road where the gate stood. When I arrived that morning, a small crowd had already gathered along the roadside. 2 county vehicles were parked beside the gravel shoulder. A white truck marked county infrastructure compliance. And another sedan from the planning office. Standing near the gate was the inspector I had spoken with on the phone. David Rourke. He was studying the metal posts sunk into the concrete while writing notes on a clipboard. A few minutes later, another vehicle pulled up. Cynthia Caldwell stepped out. She wasn't alone this time. 2 HOA board members followed behind her, along with a man carrying a leather briefcase who I assumed was the association's attorney. Caldwell looked irritated the moment she saw the county vehicles. "This is unnecessary," she said sharply as she approached the inspector. "Our legal counsel has already reviewed the authority of the association." Rourke didn't react. He simply nodded toward the gate. "Who authorized installation of this structure?" Caldwell gestured toward the entrance road. "This is Cedar Ridge Infrastructure," she replied confidently. "The association has full authority over access control." Rourke wrote something on his clipboard. Then he pointed to the ground beside the road. A small metal survey marker stuck out of the dirt. "According to county records," he said calmly, "this corridor is classified as Shared Access Easement 7B. Caldwell's attorney stepped forward. "Our understanding is that the HOA maintains the road." "Maintenance doesn't equal ownership," Rourke replied. That sentence landed heavily. A few neighbors standing nearby exchanged glances. The inspector walked slowly along the gate line, measuring the distance between the posts and the edge of the road. "Was a permit filed for installation of a barrier across the easement?" he asked. The attorney hesitated. Caldwell answered instead. "The association voted to install the gate last year." Rourke looked up from the clipboard. That wasn't the question. He flipped a page in his folder and held up a document. "This is the county easement filing recorded when Cedar Ridge subdivision was approved." He tapped a paragraph near the bottom. The text was simple and direct. "No structure may obstruct the access corridor without written county authorization." Silence spread across the road. Even the HOA board members looked uncertain now. Caldwell folded her arms. "The gate protects the neighborhood," she said firmly. "We've had issues with unauthorized traffic." Rourke nodded. "That may be." Then he pointed directly at the locked chain running across the driveway entrance. "But this structure blocks access to a connected parcel." He gestured toward my property. "Which means it obstructs the easement." Caldwell's attorney stepped in again. "If necessary, the association can pursue legal clarification." Rourke shook his head. "No clarification is needed." He opened another folder and removed a printed form. "This is a county obstruction notice." The words carried across the quiet roadside. Neighbors standing nearby leaned closer to hear. Rourke continued calmly. "The Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association installed an unpermitted barrier on a county-regulated access corridor." He looked up at Caldwell. "You'll need to remove the gate." Her expression hardened. "This road belongs to our community." That was the moment I finally spoke. Not loudly. Just enough for the people gathered around the entrance to hear. "The road belongs to the easement," I said. Everyone turned toward me. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. Rourke glanced between us. I stepped forward and handed him the copy of the easement filing the clerk had emailed earlier. The document also states that parcels outside the subdivision retain full access rights through the corridor, I said. Rourke skimmed the page. Then nodded. "That's correct." Caldwell's confidence began to crack. "If the gate comes down," she said sharply, "the community loses its security system." Rourke closed the folder. "That's not the county's concern." He handed the obstruction notice to the HOA attorney. "You have 10 days to remove the barrier." Then he paused. "And another matter needs to be addressed." Caldwell looked confused. "What matter?" Rourke pointed toward the orange notice still hanging on the gate. The one listing thousands of dollars in fines. "If the association has been issuing penalties based on control of this corridor," he said carefully, "those actions may also need review." The neighbors started murmuring now. because the numbers Caldwell had presented at the HOA meeting were no longer just internal community issues. They were tied to authority the HOA apparently never had. Caldwell turned toward me. "You caused this," she said quietly. I looked back at the steel gate, then at the easement marker in the dirt. "No," I replied calmly. "You did." Rourke cleared his throat. "Once the obstruction is removed," he said, "the county will review the rest of the filings." The inspector climbed back into his truck. The planning office sedan followed. Within minutes the county vehicles were gone, leaving the HOA board standing beside the locked gate, and a group of neighbors watching in complete silence. Because the structure that had looked so powerful just a few days earlier had now become something very different. Not a symbol of HOA authority, but a piece of evidence sitting on a road the association never legally controlled. The gate came down 9 days later. Not quietly. Not in the middle of the night. The Cedar Ridge HOA had tried to delay the removal after the county inspection, requesting additional legal clarification. But the obstruction notice Rourke issued carried a firm deadline: 10 days. On the morning of the 9th, a county compliance truck parked beside the entrance road. 2 workers stepped out along with Inspector Rourke. Word spread through the neighborhood quickly. By the time the tools came out, several residents from Cedar Ridge had gathered along the roadside. Some stood quietly. Others whispered to each other, watching the steel gate that had once been presented as the community's new security feature. Cynthia Caldwell arrived shortly after. She walked quickly toward the inspector. "Our attorney is still reviewing the county's determination," she said sharply. Rourke nodded politely. "That may be." Then he pointed to the obstruction notice posted on the metal post. "But the removal deadline remains today." Caldwell's jaw tightened. For a moment it looked like she might argue again. But the problem with official notices is that they don't care about HOA board votes. They follow county enforcement procedures. And once that process starts, delaying it becomes difficult. Rourke signaled to the workers. They stepped forward with power tools and began removing the bolts that secured the gate to the concrete posts. The sound echoed across the quiet road. Metal grinding against metal. Bolts loosening one by one. Neighbors watched as the structure that had blocked the entrance for months slowly came apart. The chain was removed first. Then the heavy steel frame. Finally, the workers lifted the entire gate section off the hinges and carried it to the side of the road. For the first time since I returned from deployment, the gravel driveway connecting my property to Old Cedar Road was completely clear. No chain. No sign. No HOA warning notices. Just open access the way it had always been. But the situation didn't end with the gate removal. Later that week, the county issued a formal follow-up notice to the Cedar Ridge HOA. The document addressed something Inspector Rourke had mentioned during the inspection: the fines. According to the county review, the HOA had issued penalties based on their claim that the entrance road belonged to the association. Because that claim had now been determined to be incorrect, the enforcement action tied to that authority could not stand. The letter listed several required corrections. First, the lien preparation process against the Mercer property was to be immediately canceled. Second, all fines issued for unauthorized use of the entrance road were declared invalid. Third, the association was required to remove any notices or restrictions preventing access to the property through the easement corridor. By the end of the week, the numbers Caldwell had presented at the HOA meeting disappeared completely. The $34,920 balance. Gone. The violation notices. Void. The threat of lien enforcement. Canceled. Cedar Ridge still existed as a homeowners association. They could still manage their subdivision, maintain their landscaping, enforce their internal rules. But the road connecting their neighborhood to Old Cedar Road had never belonged to them. And the county records had finally made that clear. A few days after the gate removal, I drove down the entrance road early in the morning. The same road that had been locked when I returned home. Now the easement marker sat quietly beside the gravel shoulder. The driveway stretched open all the way back to the ranch house. No barriers. No chains. Just a road functioning exactly the way it was designed to. Because sometimes justice doesn't come from arguments. Or shouting. Or even lawsuits. Sometimes it comes from something much simpler. A single document sitting in a county archive. And the moment someone finally decides to read it carefully. A few weeks after the gate disappeared, the neighborhood felt different. Not dramatically. Just quieter. The Cedar Ridge HOA still held meetings at the clubhouse, but the tone had changed. The long discussions about expanding authority beyond the subdivision stopped appearing on the agendas. Cynthia Caldwell remained HOA president for a short time after the county ruling. Then one evening a notice appeared on the community board. Board leadership transition, effective immediately. No explanation. Just a replacement election scheduled for the following month. After that, the association focused on things HOAs are actually meant to handle. Landscaping. Street lighting. Community maintenance. Nothing beyond their boundaries. As for the entrance road, it stayed exactly the way the county easement described it. Open. Shared. Unrestricted. One evening near sunset, I drove slowly down the gravel driveway toward the house. The steel gate was gone. The orange fine notice was gone. Even the bolt holes in the concrete had already been filled. The road looked the same as it had the day I bought the property. Which was fitting. Because sometimes restoring order doesn't require winning a fight. Sometimes it just requires reminding people that systems only work when everyone follows the same map.